Let's go. We're good
Let's
to
go.
go. I made you the co-host.
Let's go. Co-host is power. I mean, honestly. Uh, and I hope you guys are all, getting ready for Pesach in in the best possible way. I think this time is really hard and it's a struggle because I think many of us didn't think we were going to be here again this year. Um, so actually, I just wanted, before we do some learning, some thoughts about how you're going into Pesach this year that might be different from last year. And I know a lot of you, so I'm not afraid to call on you. Oh, Debbie's disappearing. Okay, I see how it works there.
I'm gonna
Don't
write.
think I don't see you. I can call you even if you put your back to me.
Wait, I'm gonna write something.
Okay, you're gonna write something. Nicole, let's go. Rachel, let's go. What do we got here? This year versus last year. What does it say?
Shabbat.
I said depressed.
Press.
Oh, oh. Yeah, well, we do have Shabbat. I want to say last year was the first Pesach I ever made, and now it's like Pesach for veterans, for Olympians. I don't know how to do the Shabbos and this and that.
It's not that hard.
We could probably help you if you need some
Oh,
instruction on the finer points of the tradition.
thank you.
So for me, last year, I was sad about it being different and just being the four of us. And this year, I'm sort of getting used to that idea and looking forward to it, even if it might be the last year. It's just my nuclear family, because now we have all these who was vaccinated, who's comfortable with this, so it was simpler last year. And this year, I feel like it's getting more complicated.
Complicated. Yeah, it's interesting because at this time last year, a lot of people were sort of dreading Pesach without the extended family. Then they had a Seder or two, and they're like, wow, this was so much easier. We really enjoyed our family, and we really liked talking to people. And actually, next year we're not inviting anybody. But I do think that we didn't think we'd be here, and I think that itself, I think every year I try to think about oppression and liberation and what liberation looks like this year. And for me, this year liberation looks like vaccination, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people. And hopefully that will lead to our capacity to be all together again next Pesach. Anyone else want to drop a line about this Pesach versus last Pesach, or maybe thoughts that you have going into the Rabbi? How about you?
I'm a little anxious because it's the first Pesach that my father's not alive. So it's, even though he wasn't with us last year, but it was like a big part of my whole existence growing up as my dad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always think about that. Who's at the Seder table and who's not at the Seder table. And when you're reading, on the one hand, you're reading the same text, but your life changes and the text changes, right? When you're reading it. So our hearts go out to you, Rabbi. You know that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know that.
And by the way, everybody as I mentioned, that we're doing a gift for every member of the shul. We have a special care package, and in the care package is one of three possible Haggadahs from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, Rabbi Blech, and the Heilige Erica Brown. So,
oh, Rabbi, that's so nice.
Yes, we bought 50 of your Haggadahs.
Oh my gosh. Oh my, honestly, if it weren't for Rabbi Klibanoff, I would give up my writing career. I just I don't know. He has a direct line to the publisher. Anyway, I want us to think a little bit. One of the reasons I want to talk about tonight, because something else happened between last year and this year, and that was an immense amount of social unrest, political unrest, um, you know, uh, conversations, difficult conversations about racism and racial equity. And, I don't know if you remember, it was like we had Pesach, and then all of a sudden, as if COVID weren't enough, we had a really, really confused state of the world. And I'm not sure we're over that. I'm not sure we're over that. And vaccination is not going to cure some of those societal ills. So I've been thinking a lot about our role in that. And I wanted to look at the early life of Moshe. A few things that I think I have learned a lot this year, and I'm looking at this text differently. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, everyone can see. So Justina Chen said, there must be a few times in life when you stand at a precipice of a decision, you know there will forever be a before and an after. And I wanted to choose a moment in Moshe's life where there's a before and an after. So here's the before. The before is the left side. Those are the sheep, right? Those are Moshe's sheep as he's in Midian and shepherding. And on the right hand side, I love this painting. This painting was probably done in the early 1600s, Moshe and the Burning Bush, Moses and the Burning Bush. And what I love about it, and I don't know if the artist had a leftover piece of canvas or the artist wanted this perspective, was to make it only 10 inches tall and 42 inches across so that it's almost like a scroll. And the reason I love this idea is it's almost scrolling this trajectory of Moshe's life. It looked one way on the left, and as you move right, you're seeing this fire. Anything you're noticing about this painting, feel free to unmute and jump in.
We don't often interview people.
I can't hear you, Miles. Shoshana, did you want to say something?
No, I wanted to
I wanted to say something.
Oh, Shelley, hello.
Hi. That it's like this arc in the color going from Moshe to the bush.
Yeah, I'm so glad you noticed that because I thought I was the only one.
Oh.
That I think the artist has made this sort of, it's almost like a rainbow connection, right? Of this arc that the light is on Moshe's shoulder, but it's almost like the refraction of the fire at Har Sinai. And that arc will connect them, right? That he will be in some way connected to the fire of the burning bush and connected, as we'll talk about a little bit later, to the fires of Har Sinai as the luchot, as the tablets were given. Any other observations?
On the left, it appears darker to me. This is Gail. And on the right, it's lighter, indicating that before he connected with Hashem and found spirituality, his life was darker.
Yeah, there's certainly much more light. And here it's interesting, Gail, like there seems to be this horizon, which maybe is mindful of where Moshe will eventually go, which is he's got a long, long journey to make because his flock will change from being sheep to being Israelites. And let me just say, sheep are probably a lot easier to move and a lot easier to be mindful of than the difficulty of managing people. So let's take this picture. And I want to think with you. Rabbi Sachs says, and I'm so glad that you're giving out Rabbi Sachs's Haggadah because I think it's one of his most beautiful works. He says, to ask is to believe that somewhere there's an answer. We ask not because we doubt, but because we believe. Sometimes, unfortunately, some people have been taught that when you're when you're in any faith commitment, you shouldn't ask questions, as opposed to, I think what Rabbi Sachs is saying is there's this moment for Moshe, and Moshe questioned God, and he questioned what he had to do, but he questioned out of a sense of belief, not out of a sense of disbelief. And one more point before we actually look at some of the text, I want to think about what a threshold moment is, the before and after. So Sherry Hirsch, a friend, said, we spend a lot of time traversing hallways and crossing thresholds in our homes and our lives, moments when we're in transition, moments when we're standing between the way we were accustomed to living and a new way of thinking, feeling, and being, moments when we're preparing to enter a new room to take the next step on the journey of our lives. So I think certainly you see this in this painting. We'll see how it comes out in the text, that you're sort of on the brink of something. And I imagine all of us have had that moment where you're like, I'm on the brink of something big. I just don't know exactly what it is, and I'm intrigued by the mystery of it. Something is pulling me, and things, once I do this, life is never going to be the same. And one of the things that Hirsch says, which I find really interesting, these moments can be disorienting and scary, sometimes painful, or even heartbreaking. Other times they're exciting, hopeful, filled with possibility. Why do some of us struggle to cross while others don't struggle to cross? So I want to offer a few radical ideas here. One of them is that the Exodus story is mimicked by Moshe himself. In other words, Moshe as an individual, as a hero, is going to undergo some of the same steps that Bnei Israel are going to undergo in their process to maturation and liberation. And so when we're talking about the threshold moment of moving from one space to another space, that actually does happen in Shmot Yud Bet. And I've just taken a few excerpts for you from you for you. And the first is, okay, you have a sheep. You're going to have that sheep in your house for a little while, from the 10th to the 14th of Nisan, and then you're going to, when you, after you shech the sheep, v'lakchu min adam, you're going to take some of the blood, v'natnu al shtei hamezuzot v'al hamashkof al habatim asher yochlu otam bahem. So you're going to take the blood and you're going to put it on your doorposts and your lintels. You're going to do this. Now, the typical reason people understand that you're doing this is so that God can figure out your house. And I got to tell you, the God who did all those plagues can figure out your house, right? He doesn't need your blood, but you need to put the blood on the door. You need, in some way, to make this commitment to say, there are risks involved in leaving Egypt and leaving what we've done for hundreds of years. But I'm going to go through that door. I'm going to powerfully go through that door. I'm going to mark that door. So it's not only me who understands that, but the Egyptian who reveres sheep, who has seen that I have shechted a sheep, I have slaughtered a sheep, I have killed their God. And now, as Maimonides says, that you can't stay because you've killed their God. Now you have to leave. So we literally go through a threshold moment by taking our thresholds and marking them with blood. Right? It's a very, very powerful image. And then it says, "V'kacha tochlu oto." How are you going to eat this, this food that you're eating? It's going to be takeout, right? It's shawarma, right? So how are you going to eat it? You're going to matnechem chagurim, na'alechem b'raglechem, maklechem b'yadechem, right? So you can see the cha here. He says, you're going to take your loins and gird them. There is a website that shows you how to gird loins in case you're ready for, you finish your Pesach cleaning, you want to do that. Put on your shoes, which is the opposite of Moses's experience, Moshe's experience at the Sneh, which is take off your shoes. Here he says, no, for this moment of readiness, Moshe's moment of readiness, he has to take off his shoes. Your moment of readiness, you have to put on your shoes, you have to have your staff in your hands, and you have to be prepared to eat this on your way out. In other words, God is saying, I need you to be ready, because when redemption happens, you never know. You never exactly know when that opportunity, that threshold is going to present itself, and you have to be ready. You have to be prepared to take advantage of it. And then, because I told you that the blood on the lintels is mostly for you and it's not for Kadosh Baruch Hu, let's look at this pasuk. Vaya hadam lachem laot al habatim. Right? This blood is your oat. And God says, listen, I've made tons of otot and moftim. I've been doing all these miraculous things. He says, but right now, this is your job. You need to make a sign. I've given you lots of signs, but you need to make a sign. And when I see that sign, when I see that you have put up that sign, then pasachti alechem, I will pass over you. In other words, this is a phenomenal observation. The God in the Pesach story, God in passing over, is having God's threshold moment. Everybody is moving. So think about that. Everybody is moving. Moshe is going to move, we'll see in a moment, but the people have to be ready to move. And it actually is, I think, a really interesting message about redemption. How many times did you have a decision? It took you so long to make, you lost it. You were going to buy that house. You were going to buy stocks in Netflix right as COVID started. I know all of you were going to do that. And then you missed that moment, right? Does anyone want to speak to that moment? You're like, I had this moment. I just wasn't ready. No, you're all ready. I should have known. Livingston, you're kind of ready for things. The rabbi preps you. He prepares you. In life, you could have said something. You could have done something. There was this moment and you just waited a little too long. Avar zmano.
Are you saying before COVID or just in general?
In general. Do you have one for me, Rachel?
Mine was pre-COVID. Like if I knew that was going to be the last time I would get to hug my mom for a year, maybe I would have stayed. Maybe I would have had a longer visit.
Yeah. Maybe you wouldn't have argued so much. No. I actually do think, to your point, Rachel, I know many people have lost parents, including my own husband, and, thinking if we would have known what we know, but now that we do know, what does that obligate us in terms of, in terms of relationships? And by the way, let's not miss a moment. There hopefully this is going to be over soon. And some of the friendships and some of the relationships we have are not going to endure because we weren't such good friends. We didn't have the bandwidth to call people. We didn't keep in touch. I just want to say, if this is you, and it's all of us in some form or another, to a relative, to a friend, to a kid, to something, um, now's a good time to pick up the phone and wish someone a good Pesach. If there's some healing to do, let that be an aspect of redemption and liberation, is that we liberate ourselves from the regrets that we might have when COVID is over, right? Anyone want to talk to that? I spent a lot of COVID eating. I just want to say I spent a lot of COVID eating. And then I had a conversation with myself, which is, when COVID is over, do you want to go to the store and buy new clothes? Or do you want to do something about it now? So that's just an example where you're just saying, when this is over, who am I? How have I showed up in the world, right? How am I ready for this next stage? So I think part of the Pesach story, which I find really interesting, is we concentrate on the leaving and don't always focus on those moments of preparation where Kadosh Baruch Hu said, you have to prepare for redemption. It just doesn't happen, right? You have to spend 3 days before you get the Torah at Sinai. Like this, you need to prepare for transformative moments. That's why we have all these 3-day periods, right? 3 days of Abraham on the Har Moriah, 3 days before you get the Torah, 3 days of Esther fasting, 3 days in the fish. You need to prepare for transformative moments. They just don't happen. So God says, put on the shoes, get the staff in hands, like get ready for something big is going to happen, but you're going to miss it if you're not ready, right? Because you imagine you're like, the Exodus happens. You're like, I forgot to put on my shoes. I can't find my left sandal, right? And I missed the whole thing. So God doesn't want us to miss those moments. And in life, we have sometimes those moments and we don't want to miss them either. I'm going to go back to our shared screen. No, also not. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, we're going to try to stop this again. This has happened. Does anyone else have this? I probably just opened up too many windows today. Okay, so I want to talk about Moshe. When Moshe dies, it says, "V'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe asher yado Hashem panim el panim." There was never a prophet like Moshe, right? Asher yado Hashem panim. That God, right, like Moses, God knew him. It says here the Lord singled him out. And I don't love that translation because it says yado for a reason. And I want to think about that verb in Hebrew, to know. God knew him face to face. This appears also in the 12th chapter of the book of Numbers, that God appears to Moshe face to face, and no one else can do it. So we want to know, how do you become like Moshe? And I'm going to make my first radical proposition is that things that the children of Israel, that the Israelites go through, are things that Moshe has to go through as an individual. My second, I think, radical notion is that prophecy, the way we understand prophecy, is absolutely erroneous. Prophecy is not about predicting the future. It's true that there were prophets who God said, this is going to happen in your future. But most of the job of a Hebrew prophet was to look intensely at the present, look intensely at things that other people turn away from, and mirror that behavior, show up that behavior to the Israelites and say, this is what you're doing. And if you want to create a just and fair society, look carefully at this. So Rabbi Heschel mentions in his book, The Prophets, to us, a single act of injustice, cheating a business, exploitation of people, it's a slight. To the prophets, a disaster. To us, injustice is injurious to the welfare of the people. To the prophets, a death blow to existence. In other words, the quality of a prophet is not about predicting the future or being in the future. It's about being intensely in the present and seeing things that other people don't want to see. And that's a great introduction to Moshe. So we meet Moshe. V'elech ish mibeit Levi v'ikach et bat Levi. So Moshe's parents, who are not named here, which is really odd because everybody in Genesis is named and we get to Exodus and no one seems to have a name. The thing that we know about Moshe's parents is they're both Levites. And we'll know 2 more things about him before the chapter ends that Martin Buber points out in his book on Moses. He will go from this house to the house of Pharaoh, and then from the house of Pharaoh, he'll go to the house of a Kohen Midian, of a Midianite priest. And Buber says, you want to create a leader? Give that leader an early life different models of leadership: the Levite model, the Pharaoh model, the Pharaonic model, and then the priestly model. So that's really interesting, and maybe explains why Moshe's parents aren't named here. The other thing I want you to notice is this chapter begins with the word Vayelech. So everything about Moses is going to be about movement, and we're going to see this term come up again and again. 3 verbs in this chapter. We're not going to go through the whole chapter, but we need to master these verbs because they tell us everything I think we need to know about who Moses is. Vayar, Moses saw. Vayelech, Moses went. V'yada, Moses knew. Okay? Knowing, seeing, and moving. Let's see. V'tar Isha, this woman, this Levite woman, she conceives and she has a son. She has a son after the prediction that all male children be thrown into the sea. So we would have said, oh no, oy vey. But she says, ki tovu, right? The observation, v'ter'eh oto. She sees him and she sees that he's beautiful, right? So that he's exceptional, that he's good. And she hides him for 3 months. V'lo yachlu od. She couldn't hide him anymore. She put him in a basket and she put him down the Nile. We know this story. We saw this movie. And then watch this. V'titatzav achoto. That his sister was placed, again not named, from a distance. L'de'ah ma'yesalo. To know what would happen to him. So right now we've had through those 3 verbs: to go, to see, and to know. And they'll come up again, right? So watch what happens. The daughter of Pharaoh, the princess, goes to wash in the Nile. V'naroteha holchot, and her maidens walk, right? They travel, right? Again, that verb repeats itself. V'tereh, and she sees, the daughter of Pharaoh sees the teva, right? And she sends someone to get it. V'tiftach v'tirehu et hayeled, and she opens it and she saw that there was a child there. V'nei nar bocheh, and the nar cries. This child cries. V'tachmol alav, and she has compassion on him. So I want to say these 2 qualities, which are so critical for Moshe, come from 2 women in this story. The woman, his mother, sees him, and even though it's terrible to have a male child, she says, ki tov. And Bat Paro, the princess who saves Pharaoh, sees him and has compassion on him. Those 2 qualities, the capacity for sight, the capacity for seeing something positively and optimistically, and having compassion, those 3 qualities, I should say, will all go into making who Moshe is. Moshe is who he is because someone saw him and said ki tov, and therefore he was able to see others and say ki tov. Someone saw him and had mercy on him, and therefore we see things and we have to have mercy. Those are qualities that Moshe has. All right, let's go back to our shared screen. Hello, Sarah Klibanoff. Amazing forehead. Okay. Oh, I did it again. No, I can't get out of it. Trying it again. All right. So let's see. We know this story. She goes to get Miriam goes to get the mother, and we're not going to look at all the terms here, but you'll see again. Halichi et hayeled hazeh, right? Take him, go with him, right? So again, going. Vigdal hayeled, and the yeled grows up. This child grows up, and she gives him a name. Vayhi b'yamim hahem vigdal Moshe. Moshe grows up v'yitzei alachav, and he goes to his brothers. Vayar b'sivlotam. He has been given that same gift of vision. Others saw him; he will see others, and he sees 2 things. He sees 2 things which capture the way that we see suffering. Vayar b'sivlotam. He sees the collective suffering. He sees the Jews suffering, and then he focuses in a hyper focus. He sees Vayar, two expressions of saying, Ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'achav. He sees that this travesty of an Egyptian killing a Hebrew. And then he looks side, Vayar kien ish. He sees that there's no one here. and he kills the Egyptian. Now he'll go on and he'll see lots of different things. He'll see more injustice. He'll see Hebrews fighting each other, and then he'll run away and he'll go to a well. And at the well, he will see more things. He will see these women who are being harassed by shepherds. And look at this, Vayavo haroim, and of course you can see ro'eh and ra'eh, to see, and to shepherd are sound the same, even though they're homophones, even though they're not the same word. Vigarshum, and they pushed these women away. V'yakam Moshe, Moshe gets up and he saves them. Now Moshe will name his first son Gershom, and sometimes we don't realize that experience of banishment that he's just witnessed may in some way help him understand the experience of banishment that he has suffered from all these years. And he begins a relationship with his father-in-law, his future father-in-law. He gets Sipporah. He says, Gershom, I'm going to name this child, when he has a child, Gershom, because he was a stranger in a strange land. And then we get to this weird thing, where all of a sudden, Vayhi b'yamim harabim hahem, v'yamat melech Mitzrayim. The Egyptian king died, and the Israelites were crying. They hadn't cried before. They're crying out to God. God hears their moaning, and he remembers his covenant. And watch what happens. Vayar Elohim et bnei Israel, v'yeda Elohim. I told you that seeing and knowing go together. And here we have it. God sees the Israelites, and God understands. He knows what happened to them. So I want to share a thesis with you, and I'll send the handout, and Rabbi can send it out if it'd be helpful for you. Because Yocheved could see Moshe, because Bat Paro could see Moshe, because they could look at things that were really difficult and do something about them. Even in Bat Paro's case, it was absolute insubordination. Imagine your father says, throw all males into the sea, male infants, and you come home and say, look, Dad, look what I have, a crying Hebrew, right? That act of insubordination came from an act of vision and an act of compassion. And she gave that. Those two women gave that to Moshe, so that Moshe wouldn't stop looking at things. And then he looked at the burning bush. As it wasn't only that he looked at difficulty, he was also able to look at wonder. And as a result of that, God looks. It's the first time I understood that maybe God looked because Moshe looked. Did Moshe in some way teach God how to look? Did Moshe say, God, if I can see an Egyptian hitting an Israelite, can't you see it? Can't you have compassion the way I have compassion? And so, I mentioned that we, since last Pesach, we've had a lot of social unrest. And although I think a lot of us don't think of ourselves as enjoying white privilege, because a lot of Jews don't see themselves that way, a lot of the rest of the world do see us that way. And I think about the responsibility that we had, really, that we inherited from Moshe, because Moshe dies and he's fully sighted, the Torah tells us, to really have vision and to look at things that are difficult and do something about them. I think that's hard. I think we don't always want to do that. But honestly, we wouldn't have a Pesach Seder if someone else wasn't willing to look at things that other people turn away from and say, that's not just. And even if it costs me a life in a palace, I'm going to fight that fight, because someone else is hurting and I'm not. And so I think this Pesach, as we sit at our Seder tables, and maybe we're somewhat far away from the hurt and suffering of some people, but we're also close to the suffering and hurt of other people. Our question is, because we can invite people to the Seder table the way that we once could. There's no come, all who are hungry, come and eat. But hopefully all who are lonely can come under our warm embrace, and we can reach out to people, make it a goal before Pesach to spend time reaching out to people who are struggling and suffering, battling with mental health issues, battling with loss, feeling the confines, maybe lost a job. That's our job, because we're Moshe's children, and we take that job very seriously. And Moshe was the child of two remarkable women, Bat Paro and Yocheved, and both of them taught him what it means to see. So thank you. It's good to see you. Speaking of seeing, it's wonderful to see you.
Can you go back to the painting for a second?
Sure.
It's always been like, whenever I've taught this, I've always said that it's big in Hasidish thought that it wasn't special, the burning bush, that Moshe could see it and nobody else could. Anybody could see it, but he stopped to look.
Correct. In fact,
If you
had
look
we
at
had more time, I was very sensitive about the time, Rabbi, but what I wanted to show,
the sheep are just doing whatever they're doing, like they couldn't care less,
right,
and he's paying attention. And you would think even an animal would notice a fire burning and not
Right.
just be grazing calmly.
yeah. And so here I was going to do this, but I wanted to, honor people's time because I know it's late. Bayar v'nei hasneh, right? And he looks, and there's this, there's this bush, but watch what happens. Bayom Moshe asrana ve'areh et hamareh hagadol hazeh. He says, like, he turns aside, to your point, and he looks at this, right? And again, that same language, mar'eh and madua, like the language of knowing, right? Comes there, and then Vayar Hashem, and then God looks. Kisar wrote because Moshe turned aside to look. And I want to just share this amazing observation. As long as you ask, Rabbi, and I'm happy to show you the picture that Buber says the name Sneh, which is peculiar to it. No other bush is called so. I don't know why I never thought that. There's no other bush in the Torah that's called a Sneh. Echoes the name of the mountain, which is omitted of set purpose at this point. The word Sneh, repeated in the same sentence, suggests the name Sinai, that is used only when the nation reaches the mountain in order to receive the revelation. I mean, amazing, right? That Moshe experiences that personal revelation that later on collectively we would go on to experience. So here's the painting again. And you can see the sheep, right? The sheep,
Especially the one that's closest to the fire.
yeah, and probably feels the heat, right? But again, no one's sort of paying attention. But Moshe is paying profound attention. And I love the way the artist has done this particular painting to show sort of Moshe, standing out because Moshe sees and he's prepared to look. And I do want to say this on, as a closing note. I have concerns about the social justice warrior model, because sometimes I think that model doesn't look for wonder. In other words, there's a lot of certainty. We know exactly what to do. We're fighting this fight. Get away from us. If you're not fighting the same fight, you're not woke. We're going to cancel you. I think one of the things that I love about Moshe and his capacity to look at injustice is that he also had the capacity to look at something he didn't understand, something that was mysterious, something that was wonderful and miraculous, and take off his shoes and say, I'm humble in this space. So humility is helpful when we're fighting the justice fight.
Great, thank you.
Denver?
All right, I'm wishing you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Phenomenal to see you. Let's all do our part, looking at justice, looking at injustice, making it happen.
Can I say one quick thing?
You could say anything, Gail.
So like you see the burning bush and you're thinking, how could anyone not see it? Because it's something so unusual. But then I was just thinking about, sometimes I'll see something and I'll see it. I'll definitely see it, a homeless person, and I'll keep walking. And if you said to me in a separate conversation, would you ever walk past a hungry person? I would of course say, oh, never, I would never do that. But then we become immune to things. And so even though it seems very obvious, a lot of us would walk past it.
Yeah.
And I take ownership for that.
Yeah, and I first of all, I appreciate your saying that. Second of all, I think we also walk past wondrous things all the time, right? I actually just want to invite all of you to say the bracha in Nisan for the tree. The first time you see it, so we can only make this bracha once a year, and it's basically the Torah's way of saying, go outside, stop and look at the wonder of the world. And so, Gail, to your point, it's not only that we're ignoring, the difficulty and ugliness of the world. Sometimes we ignore the beauty of the world, and just like, you just take it for granted. I think that was also a gift of COVID, Gail. It was like walking out in the last spring and noticing things, because honestly, there was nowhere else to go. The Pesach program was closed. So we're just, you're looking at the trees and you're saying, wow, I didn't notice this. And how did I live here for so long? And I just didn't notice this. I didn't look carefully at it.
To literally stop and smell the roses.
Literally.
Yeah. We don't have snow.
We don't have snow. Oh, don't say it. Don't say it. It's Chag Aviv. It's the holiday of springtime. The holiday.
Everyone should have a wonderful holiday.
Yeah. Chag Sameach to you all. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.